Hey everyone and welcome back to a new video. It's been a little over 2 years since 3rd edition Age of Sigmar was released, and with almost all the battle tomes having been refreshed and the Dawnbringer series in full swing, eyes and ears are starting to buzz at what could be coming with AOS's rumoured 4th edition. I should say that 4th edition AOS isn't so much a rumour as it is an inevitability. We know it's coming since it's the business model that Games Workshop runs, releasing new editions of 40k and Age of Sigmar every 3 years, with a big campaign series just before. To that end, we'll likely get an announcement in April, May of 2024, and then an official release a couple of months later in the height of summer, so be ready for that. But naturally, new editions tend to bring new models with them, and over recent years we've had quite a few new factions join the game alongside updates to some of the older ones. So if an albeit brief pattern repeats itself, we can expect to see some pretty big things from the 4th edition of Age of Sigmar, and that expectation has got me thinking about the Umbraneth, the rumoured faction of Malerion in particular, and whether they'll finally make an appearance in the game. So in this video I'm going to delve into what we know about the Umbraneth and Malerion, what we can expect from the faction, why their release will be an important one, and when we might expect to hear more. If that piques your interest, then let's jump right in. So let's answer the first question, starting with who is Malerion and what do we know about him? Well, before the world of Warhammer fantasy came to an end, Malerion was Malekith, the Witch King of Naggaroth, a character infamous for his scorn of the world and the elven people who had robbed him of his right to succeed to the Phoenix throne. To say he's a pivotal character in Warhammer fantasy lore is a big understatement, and it's no surprise that he's proved a popular one with Warhammer fans who have had the chance to reconnect with his story thanks to the recent Warhammer Total War games. However, when that world came to an end, some of the setting's most pivotal heroes, including Teclis and Tyrion, found themselves reborn as deities in the mortal realms. Malekith was one such god, reborn as Malerion, the incarnate god of shadow, deception and illusion in the realms, and the master of Ulgu, the realm of shadow. Interestingly, we've known about him in this new form since Age of Sigmar came out back in 2015. However, beyond what I've just told you, there's not a great deal more that we do know about him, other than he's technically part of Sigmar's pantheon, although the ties that bind that are tenuous at best, and he's largely been residing in his stronghold of Drukaroth, no doubt working on his own ambitions and plans. In fact, strictly speaking, we don't even know what he actually looks like. This is the only artwork we've ever seen of him, but as a god of shadow and illusion, he's been said to adopt many forms, and GW have been known to retcon things from time to time. However, we do know that he played a pivotal role in the rescue of the elven race from Slaanesh. For those who don't know, following the end times of Warhammer Fantasy, Slaanesh feasted on the souls of the elven races in a cataclysm of gluttony and greed. However, the elven gods, Teclis, Tyrion, Malerion and Morathi, banded together to trap Slaanesh and begin the difficult process of extracting those lost souls from the Dark God. Needless to say, there was mixed success. Some of the first elven souls to be saved were the Idoneth, who still bore much of their corruption and fled when they discovered Teclis was willing to destroy them rather than allow them to exist in that state. Later on though, others like the Lumineth were saved, who, by no means perfect, reflected a much purer and idealised image of elven civilization and form. But in any case, we know from the core rulebook that Malerion and Morathi also worked to save what became their own factions of elves, the Daughters of Cain in Morathi's case, and another incarnation in Malerions, which the book describes as majestic but terrible. Now, we've not seen anything official in terms of what that latter sub-faction might look like, or really heard anything substantial from the lore, but there are intriguing references. In the 3rd edition Daughters of Cain battle tome, it mentions the battles in Ulgu between Malerion and Morathi and the Dark Master Be'lakor, and specifically calls out Malerion's Olgarothi warriors. Given Malerion's position as the Master of Ulgu, it feels like a somewhat generic phrase, but it shows that Malerion has a distinct army from Morathi that is already fighting in their master's name. Similarly, we also know of the mysterious Shadowblades, master assassins who are not only believed to come from Ulgu, which I think is pretty obvious, but have also served Sigmar's own ambitions and campaigns, supposedly as a gift from another of his pantheon, more than likely Malerion. And then there's models like the Mistweaver Sai, which came out with the Silver Tower game quite a few years ago. Now, what's interesting about this illusion spellcaster is that she is known to come from Ulgu, but her ultimate master is unknown. In fact, she officially sits in the Cities of Sigmar faction, which is interesting because later similar-ish models like the Cainite Shadowstalkers now sit in the Daughters of Cain faction. So could this mercenary-like hero actually be a glimpse at those followers of Malerion who quietly serve Sigmar's cause? It could be possible, if only because it otherwise begs the question of why she's not in the Daughters of Cain faction. In any case, I do want to caveat myself quickly by saying that while there may be other lore or model references out there, and please do share them if you happen to know one or two, the gist of what I'm saying is still the same. We don't really really know anything about Malerian's forces, how they look, how they're structured, what abilities they all have, and what they are currently doing. In essence, we're in that space between having a god and faction that are clearly influential in the Age of Sigmar story, but without any distinct models or lore of their own, and that creates a vacuum that I sense is about to be filled. So what might we expect from a new faction, whether they're called Olgarothi, Umbraneth or something else entirely? Well, let's talk about look and feel first. I think it's fair to expect that shadow and illusion will be at the core of their aesthetic, and if we think of the Mistweaver model as a bit of a prototype, I sense masks and ethereal effects could be a common trait across the range. But again, the lore deliberately describes Malerian's and Morathi's forces as terrible and majestic, traits that are very evident in the Daughters of Cain model range, and I think we will also see that from Malerians, hybrids of majestic elven forms fused with terrible taloned creatures, likely mimicking the image we do have of Malerion in some way. In fact, I think the Drukhari from Warhammer 40k might give us a sense of how that hybrid tone can play out. I'm not saying we'll get that exact sort of look and feel, but I think we may see that in contrast to the glowing Idealiz forms of the Umbraneth and Malerion. Malerion's army will mock that somewhat with a hideous and carnal interpretation, just as their cousins the Idoneth do to some extent. Of course, with so little to go on, it feels somewhat pointless to get too deep into details, and so instead, I do think it's worth mentioning the fact that we're bound to see a pretty broad range of models with any new faction. Age of Sigmar has some of the most incredible centerpiece models in Warhammer, and the most recent ranges, including the recent Cities of Sigmar, have set a high benchmark for both rank and file models and the more colossal heroes and creatures. And when I think about that sort of breadth to any new range centered around the looming form of Malerion, I think it's easy to see why many players like myself are getting excited. When it comes to how the faction plays on the tabletop though, I think your guess is as good as mine. However, given the themes of illusion and shadow that are bound to be at the forefront of their look and feel, I hope we see that in the way the army deploys, moves and attacks. Malerion has spent a lot of time scheming and plotting in the shadows after all, and I want to really feel that when I use the models. Speaking of which, why would Malerion and his army's arrival on the tabletop be such a big moment for Age of Sigmar? Well, as we move into the next narrative era in AOS, it's worth looking back at what we've already seen. Chaos, death and destruction have all had big spotlights on them at various points and editions, and now I think there's a sense that that same spotlight is turning towards the Order Grand Alliance as a whole. We know about the difficult alliances and broken promises within Sigmar's pantheon, and now there's a moment where we can really make that a big part of the story and see the tension perhaps explode into open conflicts like we did briefly in the Broken Realms series. But more so, the Dawnbringer series is bringing an end to 3rd edition with a very obvious sense of conflict. The Dawnbringer Crusades are enormous and they're currently battering their way through the realms and taking on anything and everything that gets in their way. It's a very traditional feel for Warhammer, and if anything, it makes me feel that the next chapter might in fact be more subdued, a conflict of subterfuge, shadow wars and manipulation as each faction, particularly Order, recover from the events of the Crusades. That's a more personal preference, and I'm not saying the stories of vast armies battling across the realms are going away, but I think Malerion's arrival could mark a new type of warfare in AOS, and with that could come new stories and new ways of playing the game, such as new pitch battle rules, battle plans and fresh updates to the current AOS format. We may even see that spill over into Warcry and Underworlds through new warbands and expansions. But even if that's not the case, Malerion's arrival could also simply bring a much needed dynamic to the Order Grand Alliance. The factions that make it up are certainly diverse and interesting on their own, but Malerion definitely feels like more of the dark horse of the group, able to not only drive their collective story forward, but also to play with and manipulate them to the point that we get to see each shine in a new light. To put it bluntly, candles often shine brightest in the darkest shadows, and I think that's a theme I want to see not only with the Order Alliance, but the whole Age of Sigmar roster in general. And finally, the big question: when are we going to find out if this is happening or not? Well, currently the Dawnbringer series is set to conclude this winter with book 4 of the series, and then, if we don't get some big hints in that conclusion, I think we'll start to get a new narrative building which will set the scene for 4th edition's wider story. If that hints at events and schemes within Olgu, I think we can be confident that Malerion might be ready to make his presence known more openly. That said, we have seen factions such as the Caradron Overlords come out mid-edition or near the end of one, so it's not a hard and fast rule that we need to see them on day one, but I'm certainly going to keep my eyes on the Warhammer community site following the release of Dawnbringer's Book 4 for any clues as to where we're going next. Just be sure to pack a torchlight. So that's a few of my own thoughts on Malerion and his faction potentially coming to Age of Sigmar's 4th edition. Again, this is purely speculation based on very limited information, so apologies if I've missed anything. But more importantly, let me know what you think. Do you feel Malerion's arrival is around the corner, and what do you expect his faction will offer both as a standalone army and to the Age of Sigmar game and story overall? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. But as always, a big thank you for joining me today. If you did like the video, please do click the like button and subscribe if you'd like to join me for future Warhammer videos, and I hope you're able to join me for my next one. Until then, however, take care.